Because they've been hailed as the finest tool for social mobility ever invented. They've also been described as the best thing to come out of Britain since the Beatles. They've been copied around the world with huge success. They've provided prime ministers, chancellors, captains of industry, and a raft of groundbreaking entrepreneurs. For those of you who still don't know what I'm talking about, let me educate you. They are grammar schools. And in one of the best pieces of news since Roy Hodgson quit, it is being quietly suggested Theresa May is looking at bringing them back. Hooray! Because grammars are great.
I'm very torn on this because I think in an ideal world we would live in a situation where the standard of all schools was brought up.
Yeah.
Because I think that your education is the biggest gift that you can receive.
And your parents.
From your parents, if they can do that for you and live in an area. But right now, the question is, sadly, do we sort children by neighbourhood or do we sort them by ability? And grammar schools, there's a certain amount of myth around why they and how they were so brilliant. I mean, and that's been discussed in the media. And people of a certain age look back at them with extreme fondness. And yet they're ruthlessly unfair in some ways because you don't make sure at the same time, it certainly doesn't seem to be happening, that the standard of all schools are being brought up. But you can't, and it's very hard to argue, I think, against the idea that just because you live in a poor neighbourhood and you yourself are without means as a family, but you're super smart, that you couldn't be given the opportunity to go to a fantastic school. So I find myself wanting something that seems to be quite impossible to be the case, that everything is lifted, and yet at the same time seeing the merit of grammar schools.
So can we say that we're half in accord for once in a long, long time? You are right. You are right. The thing where I believe they went wrong last time was the provision for the children who didn't attain what used to be known as an 11+, who didn't, and so they were sheep and goats or whatever they might be. And the failure of the idea was that in those days they were called secondary modern schools or whatever they were, they simply didn't cater for the child. Along with grammar schools, I would have a massive revolution, because if a child, say a child wants to be a beautician or a lad wants to be a plumber, what is the point of teaching him the rivers of the world or maths where he has no interest at all? Let's borrow an idea from Germany where they have colleges and gymnasiums, as they're called, and a kid who wants to be a plumber, then from the age of about 11, we are teaching him or her to be a plumber, and then they go off and be a plumber. And the other kids who want to be prime ministers, they go to the grammars. Surely...
Do kids know what they want to be at 11?
I don't think they want to be... I agree with you, Michelle. They don't know what they want to do when they're 11. I think they all have their dreams and aspirations, but they certainly don't know at the age of 11
Is
what
it
they
fair
want
to
do.
say whatever educational ability you might have, the level of how far you might go is shown by the age of 11? I'm not saying that you know that you're going to be an entrepreneur, you know you're going to be a journalist.
I think every child deserves the chance. Every child does. But when you see someone who is standing out against all the other children, and I think it's fair to send them to a better school.
But the support must be for the others.
I think the problem's going to be there are so few grammars currently. There are, a couple of hundred. And, you're going to have to roll out a huge number of them. And, yes, I think you're absolutely right, in consort with technical education, which I think is also coming downstream. A previous member of the government, Nick Bowles, went off to Norway. And now that's coming in. And I think that there's going to be this idea that at 16 you can diverge and you can go into a technical pathway, and that's going to be brilliant because we need more trained people and apprentices and all the rest of it. But I think that if you have a lot of these grammar schools, I think the evidence has been that, as with Sure Start or any provision, it is always colonised by the middle classes. So the idea that the underachieving poor white boy is going to actually be brought up very quickly by the allowing of grammar schools again, because at the moment it's illegal to have selective education in the state sector, to create new selective schools.
If you look at the new cabinet, someone such as David Davis, who's now known as the Brexit minister...
We've got grammar school grafters,
grew up in a council estate and went to a grammar school and has now achieved what he's achieved. I would argue he's obviously had a damn good parent, whatever the situation, but he had the right education. That's why I said at the start, they can be tremendous tools of social mobility. I don't think they are solely colonised.
But the evidence of the intake in grammar schools is that there is only 3% of free school meals. So basically they are colonised, as I said, by the middle classes. So you've got to get grammar schools which are used by the poorest and the most underachieving sectors.
The good old days.
So they must be put in the areas where there are the least achieving populations.
I think education in this country needs to be picked up and given a massive shake, because I don't think it's massively fit for purpose at the moment. So when I see, and I work with a lot of young kids that have come out of school, and some of the basic stuff that they lack, they just don't seem to have this common sense and this gumption on how to get on in the world. And then I work also with employers who are saying we just don't have the skills that we need. These kids are not leaving school with the skills. So for me, I think education needs a proper shake-up to look at what are we actually teaching them. And to your point specifically about grammar schools, I remember when I was at school, it was carnage. And what we had in our class, we had a couple of bright kids, academically bright kids, and they were massively held behind by a lot of the other people in our class, because in our class people were messing around. They used to lock supply teachers in cupboards. They used to do all kinds of stuff. And those academic bright kids were absolutely hindered by the shenanigans that was going on in our classroom.
But it doesn't work for either kid, does it?
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
So to pluck that talent out and actually nurture it separately, if that's what your talent is academically, then I'm not necessarily against that.
And this gives people the chance who don't have that financial,
clout.
Clout. And I was brought up in a working class background, and I would have loved the opportunity.
You went to a state school?
Yeah, I did. And I was from the East End of Glasgow, and I think it's fantastic if we pick out the kids, the bright kids, and give them a chance, because their parents don't have the financial means to send them to schools.
The thing I was going to talk about, though, was the process through which we let people into these schools, because actually I remember doing an entrance exam, and then I remember other friends doing entrance exams, and I'm talking about friends who also went to a grammar. There was a grammar.
What age, Emma? To what
sort
of school?
I was at 8 when I did an entrance exam to a private school, having been at the local comp, and then I was 11 again doing another exam. And
did you get it right at the same time?
Some people perform very well in exams. Others are atrocious.
Yeah.
And actually, I think if we're going to reintroduce grammar schools and do it properly in the idea of where they should be in the country, you have to have a range of sort of assessments. Because, just hear me out for a moment, because coursework is very, very good at weeding out people who don't, on the day,
but you still need to
do a
perform
memory
on the day.
box. There has to be a mix, because there are horror stories out there about how people went for their 11 plus and couldn't perform.
No, I know. Hay fever, family bereavement.
It changes their entire life. And I think this whole one-stop shop, I'm up for competing, I'm up for getting in there, but I think you've got to have room in the system to allow different people to come
I'm
through.
really interested. I thought I would be shouted down on this one.
I've got a question for you, actually.
Uh-oh.
So I've got an 11...
It's not geography, is it?
I've got an 11 plus question for you.
Oh, no.
So I'd be interested to see whether or not...
Can we any of us do it?
Hang on.
It's reserved initially for Nick.
Right.
So, Nick, select the option which has the sentence with the most suitable grammar. So there's your choices, and I want to know which one you think is the right one.
I'm trying. Oh, it's gone! Was it he who had... No, it's not that. Was it he whose house burnt down? Was it he whose house burnt down? I am going to... Was it he... No, because that would be he who had... I'm going to go for 2.
You're going to go for 2.
Two.
Let's show us the correct answer. The correct answer is indeed...
There we go.
That one.
And I didn't go to grammar.
Well done.
I did go to private.
Well done.
Yes, and so I'm staggered by the amount of... Because this, if you think about it, and you were right, people hark back to a certain gold age, it does sort of belong in the 50s and the 60s, but I think it can be retooled, and it can really, really work in the future.
It's a good thing. We don't want, and we haven't got government run by private school poshos, and the cabinet now looks very much like this table around the pledge, doesn't it?
A good thing?
A very good thing.
I think it's great.
Yeah, a mixture of different educations and beautiful blonde women.
Well, we all learned something there.
No, I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for the others.
Lessons over, Michelle.